over the bridge or taking the train through the tunnel. But man, that's crazy. Anyway, he made it across the river in about half an hour. And yes, he was on time for the meeting. Amazing.
I love people that are resourceful that way. I would totally do that.
You would not.
Yes, I would. I get out of cars, I run, I take my shoes off. You have no idea.
I've seen you running down the street.
What?
I've seen you running down. So you don't know I'm watching.
She's running away from you.
Yes.
He's like chasing behind on his little big wheel, trying to catch up. Yeah.
You're saying that because I'm a Jew.
Oh my God.
You can't play that card all day.
Stop.
Kimberly.
Disavowing. Okay, Craig. Good job. All right. All right. So this one more thing is really great because I love it when you have young women that are doing something different. Like I tried out for the soccer team when I was little, the boys team. Well, this 16-year-old girl, she's a NASCAR driver, and she receives her high school diploma before the race. Her name is Haley Deegan, and she's taking the NASCAR world by storm. She's an up-and-coming driver, and I'll tell you something. She is really excited about doing this. She went on to place 7th in her post-graduation race, which moves her into the top 5 in the overall season standings. She is also the only woman currently a part of the NASCAR Next program for Rising Stars, having finished in the top 10 in all of her races this season.
She could help me get my license.
She could probably teach you how to drive.
Yes, I do need somebody to help me.
By the way, I drove myself.
Really?
A whole 40 minutes to the airport. Well, 40 minutes total, 20 minutes there and back. And I didn't have any problems. I didn't get pulled over, no accidents, nothing.
This is a New York achievement. I actually drove a car.
It wasn't in New York. It was in New Jersey.
Well, that still counts. They have roads there, you know.
Yes, they do. Paved.
Delightful
paved
roads.
And everything.
Delightful roads. I think I'll have a knish tonight.
I think I'll have fish and chips.
Really?
Well,
Don't, Jesse. I actually called him one.
All right.
Set your DVRs. Never miss an episode of The Five. It's almost 6. We cannot forget the best in news. His name is Bret.
What?
It gets better and better.
Did that rhyme?
Yeah, that was good. Thank you. Thanks, Greg. President Trump says illegal immigrants should be stopped at the border and sent back without seeing a judge. Outrage over a Virginia restaurant's refusal to serve the White House press secretary puts the spotlight on the growing incivility in politics. Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters just held a news conference on Capitol Hill. We'll bring you that. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. President Trump is digging in his heels over the concept of taking the legal and bureaucratic process out of immigration enforcement. He wants potential illegal immigrants turned back at the border without seeing a judge. And he insists it's up to Congress to act quickly to fix a broken system. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts starts us off on the North Lawn tonight. Good evening, John.
Bret, good evening. The toxic environment surrounding this summer's illegal immigrant crisis on the border continues to build, with Trump administration officials being thrown out of restaurants and the president wanting to throw illegal migrants out of the country.
Thank you. See you in a minute.
Meeting with Jordan's King Abdullah today, President Trump was focused on the Middle East peace process, but it was again immigration that piqued his interest in a Q&A with reporters.
We want strong borders and we want no crime. Strong borders, we want no crime. The Democrats want open borders and they don't care about crime.
The president said he has no regrets about signing last week's executive order to keep families together, shooting down reports that he didn't want to sign it. But he again insisted that it is Congress that needs to act to find a permanent solution.
The laws are obsolete. The laws are horrible, having to do with the border, both in terms of security and in terms of taking care of people. President Obama had a big problem. In fact, a lot of the pictures used they thought would be, I guess, I don't know what you folks did. You used pictures from 2014. They were all taken during the Obama administration.
President Trump said today he is dealing with the same problems that the Obama administration faced. On his policy of detaining families, ending catch and release, the president got some support from President Obama's Homeland Security Secretary, Jay Johnson.
We believed it was necessary at the time. I still believe it is necessary to maintain a certain capability. For families, we can't have catch and release. And in my 3 years, we deported or repatriated or returned over 1 million people.
In a weekend tweet, President Trump proposed to reduce the problem of housing illegal migrants by eliminating the adjudication process. The president writing, "When somebody comes in, we must immediately, with no judges or court cases, bring them back from where they came." Many people saw that as the president's scorching due process.
That's not what our country stands for. We are a people who believe in the worth of every human being. And we do have a system of laws in this country.
The White House says already thousands of people are deported every year without seeing a judge. Under U.S. law, illegal migrants from Mexico and Canada are subject to expedited removal, taken to a border crossing and released. The president's idea would expand that to include people from non-contiguous countries. But the White House insists there is an easier way.
The president would certainly like to see more expedited removal, but ultimately the president would like to see our border secured so that we don't have all of these problems to begin with. The president wants to fix our immigration system completely, not just tinker with it.
The press secretary today also talked publicly for the first time about a weekend incident in which she was asked to leave the Red Hen restaurant in Lexington, Virginia.
I was asked to leave because I work for President Trump. We are allowed to disagree, but we should be able to do so freely and without fear of harm. And this goes for all people, regardless of politics. Healthy debate on ideas and political philosophy is important, but the calls for harassment and push for any Trump supporter to avoid the public is unacceptable.
After she was asked to leave the Red Hen restaurant in Lexington, Sarah Huckabee Sanders and her husband retired back to where they were staying for the evening. Her family decided to go out to another restaurant in the area. They were followed to that restaurant by a number of people, including the owner of the Red Hen, who continued to protest their presence outside that restaurant, even though Sarah Sanders was no longer with them. Bret?
The rest of the story there, John. Thank you. The Sanders incident is just the latest in a series of decorum-busting moves that would probably have been unthinkable a generation or two ago. Over the weekend, California Democrat Maxine Waters called on supporters to, quote, push back on Trump cabinet members spotted in restaurants, stores, or other public places. She's been getting hammered for that. Moments ago, she held a news conference on Capitol Hill to insist she never called for any violence.
Trump is the one who's creating lies, trying to have people believe that I talked about harming people. There's nowhere in my statement, anytime, any place, that we talked about harm. And so our members of the Democratic caucus are talking about civility, and that makes good sense. But protest is civility. Protest is about peaceful resistance to the kind of actions that we're experiencing from this president.
Again, that moments ago on Capitol Hill. Tonight, correspondent Doug McKelway looks at the rising tide of anger in politics and whether any end is in sight.
In the window of the Red Hen restaurant in Lexington, Virginia, the words of Martin Luther King Jr. are framed, quote, "Love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend." On Friday night, the Red Hen's owner, Stephanie Wilkinson, asked White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders to leave, citing Trump administration policies. Sanders complied. After an employee of the restaurant posted about the incident, Sanders tweeted about Wilkinson, quote, "Her actions say far more about her than about me." Wilkinson later told the Washington Post, quote, "I'm not a huge fan of confrontation," but she added, "This feels like the moment in our democracy when people have to make uncomfortable actions." For others, the booting out of Sanders set a new standard in incivility.
This is very dangerous. She should apologize to the American public.
It follows a week in which members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus heckled the president in the Capitol building.
Don't you have kids, Mr. President?
And a congressional intern hurled an F-bomb at Mr. Trump. The same week, Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen was shouted out of a D.C. restaurant by aggressive hecklers. They showed up outside her townhome, too.
What would you do?
Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi had to abandon her night out at the movies in the face of a similarly confrontational mob.
If she wants people to protest, that's one thing. But to continue this, they're inciting violence.
That while Democratic California Congresswoman Maxine Waters called on her supporters to step up the confrontations. Quote, if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them and you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
Obviously, what Maxine Waters said is beyond the pale, and really the next move is the Democratic colleagues. If she starts to feel the heat from Democrats in the House who tell her publicly she went too far and she should take it back, that's how you start to fix these things.
And that's what the Senate Minority Leader did this afternoon.
But no one should call for the harassment of political opponents. That's not right. That's not American.
House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi partly did that, not naming Waters, but naming the president. She tweeted, quote, Trump's daily lack of civility has provoked responses that are predictable but unacceptable. The counter-puncher-in-chief fired back with this tweet. Congresswoman Maxine Waters, an extraordinarily low IQ person, has become, together with Nancy Pelosi, the face of the Democrat Party. She has just called for harm to supporters. Be careful what you wish for, Max.
And you saw in that late afternoon press conference just moments ago how Maxine Waters blamed the president for the violent rhetoric and took no responsibility for itself. It would be reasonable to infer, however, that she was forced into that late afternoon press conference by the tweet from Leader Pelosi on the House side and the floor remarks by Senator Schumer on the Senate side. That's it from Lexington. Brett, back to you.
Doug McKelway outside the Red Hen. Doug, thanks. Another major sell-off on Wall Street today over fears of escalating trade disputes. All three major indices hit lows for the month. The Dow was down for the 9th day in the last 10, losing 328 today. The S&P 500 gave back 38. The Nasdaq plummeted 161. Tonight, correspondent Kevin Corke at the White House on the short-term consequences of President Trump's trade policy.
In announcing the company would shift production of some of its motorcycles to the European Union to avoid new EU tariffs, Harley-Davidson today slammed the brakes on a key White House narrative that protectionism by way of tariff saves American jobs. The move comes after the Trump administration hit the EU with tariffs of 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum. In retaliation, the EU began charging import duties on a range of U.S. products, including motorcycles. And in Harley's case, that meant raising from 6% to 31% the tariff per imported Harley. In its filings with the SEC, the Wisconsin company suggested that this was an unintended consequence of an aggressive trade policy by the White House, calling its decision the only sustainable option to make its motorcycles accessible to customers in the EU. But White House officials place blame for the tariff dispute squarely at the feet of the EU.
The European Union is trying to punish U.S. workers because they've engaged repeatedly in unfair trade practices, and the president is saying enough is enough. We'd like to work with the EU to work on a level playing field.
Sanders' comments reflect an increasingly aggressive posture by the administration. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross saying that the days of, quote, spoiling U.S. trade partners are over, and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin warning that proposed investment restrictions on some American companies will target all countries that are trying to steal our technology, a not-so-veiled reference to China. Economists believe the trade war could spread, consuming the auto industry next, where the president has already threatened to hit European car makers with a stock market-rattling 20% import fee.
In the short term, it's not good for Trump. The one thing is the markets don't like tariffs. The market loves Trump, but the markets don't like tariffs. So we're seeing this immediate negative reaction, and it could last for the next few days.
Barring a last-minute deal, the U.S. is set to hit China with another $34 billion in tariffs in July. Brett?
Kevin Corke at the White House. Kevin, thank you. Let's talk more about trade, politics, and the other stories of the day. Senior political analyst Bret Hume is here tonight. Good evening, Bret.
Hi, Brett.
You know, just before we came out here, the president tweeted about this story. Surprised that Harley-Davidson, of all companies, would be the first to wave the white flag. I fought hard for them, and ultimately they will not pay tariffs selling into the EU, European Union, which has hurt us badly on trade, down $151 billion. Taxes, just a Harley excuse excuse. Be patient. #MAGA. Thoughts on that?
Well, I would interpret "be patient" to mean just let this go for a while, Harley Davidson. Don't do anything, because I think I'll get a deal out of this, and everybody will be happy. So far, we haven't seen any deals. It's not even really clear, Bret, what negotiations are underway. So I can understand the president's desire to tamp this down, because it's an embarrassing result.
But on the big picture, when you look at this policy and what they're attempting to do, potentially does it pay off down the road?
This is the issue that has bedeviled trading nations for practically as long as there have been such things, which is nations engage in unfair trade practices. Tariffs themselves can be unfair trade practices. China engages in a range of practices designed to advantage their companies and their economy and to disadvantage others. It's not fair. And we have a set of rules to be enforced by the World Trade Organization. I think the Trump administration has basically concluded that that system involving the World Trade Organization is dysfunctional. It doesn't work. It takes too long. It's too bureaucratic, in some cases stacked against the United States, which leaves you with what other weapon in hand? Tariffs. So in a sense, you end up fighting unfair trade practices with tariffs. Now, tariffs can be effective, and they do make a difference, as the Harley Davidson episode shows, but they are dangerous. And if you trigger a trade war in which it goes tit for tat and tit for tat, pretty soon you've got a beggar thy nation situation going on like what we had during the Depression, and everybody loses. And that's the danger. The president may get deals out of this, and it may work, but make no mistake about it, he's playing with fire.
Yeah, and it's the be patient part that is the tough part.
Be hard for companies.
I want to ask you about the civility story. You heard Congresswoman Maxine Waters in this news conference kind of walking back her statements, but not fully, to confront Trump cabinet members, get in their face after the Sarah Sanders incident over the weekend. Your thoughts?
Couple of thoughts. I don't think it's going to play. That stuff is going to play well with the public at large, no matter what your political affiliation. But it does exemplify the extremes to which people are going and the extremes which people are feeling in reaction to this president. I'm not saying it's his fault, but what I am saying, though, is that people are responding to him in the most extraordinary way. And every time he does or says something, what happens is that extrapolating from his sometimes not very clear language, people take the most extreme conclusions about what he's doing or trying to do and react to them accordingly. And the next thing you know, you're in a spiral of uncivil and incivil behavior like we're seeing here. I don't think it'll play very well. And I don't know what Maxine Waters was talking about when she said she never called for harm. Throwing people out of restaurants and hounding them in their homes is harmful. It isn't physical harm, but it's harm nonetheless. I don't think I think she'll be quieted by her colleagues.
And obviously, the president has a long history of being a counterpuncher when he's
all kinds of stuff.
And he tweeted out, "You might be not happy with what you asked for," or whatever he said at the end of that
Which was immediately taken as a veiled threat.
Right.
Well, threat to do what? Not clear, but it's a wonderful. So here comes the cycle all over again.
Right.
He's issuing threats. I mean, it's just, we need to stop all this and begin to behave in a civilized manner. And it's, this is the age we live in, I'm afraid, Bret.
All right, Bret. Thank you.
You bet.
Another deadline come and gone in the battle between congressional Republicans and the Justice Department over access to information about alleged infiltration of the Trump presidential campaign. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is here with an update. Seems like we're going into these deadlines all the time, Catherine.
Well, that's right, Bret, and good evening. The FBI Director and Deputy Attorney General are now scheduled to testify publicly on Capitol Hill Thursday as the pitched battle over FBI records further escalates. The allegation leveled by some Republicans is that the official July 2016 timeline for when the Russia case began conflicts with records that suggest the FBI began gathering intelligence much earlier than publicly acknowledged.
I think the American people are beginning to see what it is that we've been after for a very long time. And that is it common, or does it ever happen, that the counterintelligence agencies or capabilities of this country, are they used to target political campaigns?
FBI agent Peter Strzok, who will be deposed by lawmakers later this week, wrote the FBI memo that officially opened the FBI Russia case on July 31st, 2016. The outstanding records focus on intelligence activities and the FBI's alleged use of confidential human sources to investigate Trump campaign aides prior to that date. 2 letters delivered late Friday to Congress said the FBI believes it has substantially complied with a majority of the committee's requests and addressed whether the FBI utilized confidential human sources prior to initiating that investigation. The House Intelligence Committee said the FBI under Director Wray and DOJ under Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein did not provide a comprehensive response, and the department wrongly limits the records to congressional leadership. After the weekend back and forth, the president took to Twitter. "I have tried to stay uninvolved with the Department of Justice and FBI, although I do not legally have to. But you do have to ask why the DOJ and FBI aren't giving over requested documents." The House Committee's ranking Democrat Adam Schiff told Fox in a statement Republicans want the records to help President Trump and to undermine the credibility of the Russia probe. A Justice Department official dismissed today's deadline as questions asked and already answered. Brett.
Kevin, thank you.
You're welcome.
Up next, he's already given the U.S. fits. Now Turkey's longtime president is gaining even more power. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 5 in New York, as Toys R Us began in April, the chain has struggled to compete with Walmart, Target, and online competitors such as Amazon. Fox 2 in San Francisco, as wind-driven wildfires destroy buildings and threaten hundreds of others. The fires are racing across dry brush in rural Northern California. Earlier today, Cal Fire said at least 8,200 acres had burned and there was zero containment. Authorities ordered several thousand people to evacuate that area. There are no reports of deaths or injuries as of yet. And this is a live look at Boston from Fox 25. The big story there tonight, allegations the son of Governor Charlie Baker groped a woman on an airplane. The alleged assault happened on a JetBlue flight last week. The U.S. Attorney's Office is investigating. The Republican governor says that while he loves his son, the allegations are serious and he will comply with the investigation. The lawyer for Andrew Baker says he looks forward to resolving the matter. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. There is new unrest in Iran tonight. Police used tear gas on protesters in front of the parliament building today. Iranians are upset over the cratering economy there. Meanwhile, Turkey's longtime president is extending his rule and his power and promising to make his country a top 10 economic power. Correspondent Connor Powell looks at the situation tonight from our Middle East newsroom.
Recep Tayyip Erdogan has dominated Turkish politics for the last 15 years, and now the 64-year-old strongman has dramatically remade the country's constitution, giving him power until at least 2023. His victory institutes sweeping new presidential authorities that weaken parliament and remove the post of prime minister. Erdogan hailed the election as the beginning of a new era for the NATO member.
Starting from tomorrow, we will begin working to fulfill pledges we made to our people.
But the opposition says the election, while free, was anything but fair, and the vote is another step towards an increasingly authoritarian rule.
The new regime that takes effect from today is a major danger for Turkey. A single part and a single person becoming the state.
Some 1,300 miles away in Iran, merchants in Tehran's Grand Bazaar voiced their anger with the Iranian government, protesting today the deteriorating economic situation. Prices for consumer goods have risen dramatically recently, and the Iranian currency, the rial, has plunged to new lows as U.S. sanctions are set to be reintroduced. Security forces used tear gas to disperse the crowds who were marching towards the Iranian parliament, demanding the regime fix the economy.
Analysts say President Trump's withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal is putting economic pressure on Tehran. But whether or not the worsening economy will lead to a mass revolt and regime change, as some in Washington hope for, remains to be seen. Brett?
Connor Powell in our Middle East newsroom. Connor, thank you. Up next, the former congressman who went to prison and once threatened a reporter wants his old job back. First, beyond our border tonight, North Korea has opted not to hold an anti-U.S. imperialism rally to mark the anniversary of the start of the Korean War. It's the first time in years the event has not taken place. It's another sign of the improving relations between the two countries following the summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un earlier this month. The European Union has banned travel and frozen the assets of 11 senior Venezuelan officials. The EU is pressing the nation's leaders to hold fresh elections and return to democratic rule. Venezuela responded by accusing European leaders of meddling in Venezuela's internal affairs and undermining the nation's peace. President Nicolas Maduro coasted to victory last month in elections boycotted by the opposition and denounced by the U.S. and its allies. British lawmakers have just approved a new runway for Heathrow Airport. It's billed as the most important transportation decision in a generation there. Activists protested against the expansion outside Parliament. The decision on Europe's biggest airport comes after years of debate. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back. In America's election headquarters tonight, a nasty battle for the Republican nomination in the congressional seat serving Staten Island and part of Brooklyn. In one corner, the mild-mannered incumbent. In the other, a fiery former congressman who once threatened a reporter with physical harm and later went to prison. Here's correspondent David Lee Miller.
The New York City borough of Staten Island, unlike much of the city, is Trump country. Tuesday's contentious Republican primary race has two Trump supporters facing off. Former Congressman and federal tax fraud felon Michael Grimm is challenging incumbent Congressman Dan Donovan. Each claims he is the only one who can keep the seat from the Democrats, who are having their own primary.
If I don't win this primary, we will lose this seat. Of that, I'm sure.
My opponent can't win a general election in November.
Incumbent Donovan has represented New York's 11th congressional district since 2015, when former FBI agent Michael Grimm resigned from Congress after pleading guilty to tax evasion. Grimm served 7 months in prison and now says the charges were politically motivated. Many voters remember Grimm for an on-camera confrontation with a reporter who he threatened to throw off a balcony. Last month, President Trump endorsed Donovan, reminding supporters of losing a Republican Senate seat, tweeting, "Remember Alabama? We can't take any chances on losing to a Nancy Pelosi-controlled Democrat." Grimm says Trump might have unintentionally helped his own campaign.
It may have even fired up my base because a lot of them who are full supportive of our president think he got it wrong.
Donovan won the president's endorsement despite voting against Mr. Trump's position on taxes, health care, and sanctuary cities. He says Grimm failed to cast the most crucial ballot.
My opponent went to federal prison and lost his right to vote. He couldn't even vote for the president.
In a published report today, Grimm backed away from a previous claim made during a radio debate that Donovan offered to help him obtain a presidential pardon if he dropped out of the congressional race. Grimm told the Wall Street Journal the remark was made during the heat of the debate and that there was not a quid pro quo. Bret.
David Lee Miller. Thank you. Some major rulings tonight to tell you about at the U.S. Supreme Court. Let's get right to my colleague and anchor of Fox News at Night, Shannon Breen. Good evening, Shannon. First up, we've got the court essentially taking on the districts in Texas. So the question is, the congressional districts, how does this potentially affect the midterms?
Yeah, it's interesting because there were a couple of congressional districts in play here and also some state house seats also there in Texas. And what they did, for the most part, this is going to be viewed as a win for the Republicans today based on what the court decided. In a 5-4 ruling, they said these districts that have been the subject of a fight since way back in 2011, well, they're now going to leave most of them alone. Only one of them they actually held had a problem. This 5-4 vote, critics had said that these were drawn in a way that gave minority voters less of a voice. So they've got this one district now that the court said was impermissible racial gerrymandering. They're going to send that back down. But for those congressional districts in Texas, the ones that would impact us here on Capitol Hill, they're not going to change.
So they also took on action on the case of the Washington State florist, who we've reported on many times, declined to do flowers for a same-sex wedding. What happened there?
Yeah, this is Baronelle Stutzman. So we've all been watching her case. She had a longtime client she was very close to, but when he asked her to do flowers for a same-sex wedding, she declined based on her religious convictions and offered to help him find someone else. So the man's partner posted about it on social media. That's when the Washington State Attorney General found out about it. He and the ACLU, not the couple, they're the ones who sued the florist. So today, in light of the ruling a couple of weeks ago in favor of the Colorado baker, the Supreme Court sent the florist case back to Washington State, to the Supreme Court, saying, reconsider that based on what we did with the baker. Bret, I will not be surprised if this case winds up back at the Supreme Court within a year or two, because there were a lot of questions left unanswered in that Baker case.
But for those folks, they see optimism in that move.
They do.
Yeah.
They feel like it's a good.
So what are we waiting for tomorrow? It wraps up tomorrow.
Well, allegedly they were going to wrap up today, but they've got these really big decisions they haven't been able to finalize. So travel ban 3.0, just how far does the president's executive power go when it comes to controlling the borders? That case also about forced union fees for public sector employees who say they don't want to support a union's political messages and activities. So again, we will get another round of opinions tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. and we think they're going to add at least one more day.
And we will see you tonight at 11 p.m. Eastern. All right, thanks. That unlikely political couple of the 41st and 42nd presidents back together today. George H.W. Bush tweeting, special visit today with a great friend and now a best-selling author. Luckily, I had a freshly laundered pair of Bill Clinton socks to mark the occasion. Great to see. Clinton is currently promoting his novel co-written with veteran mystery author James Patterson. Speaking of politics, please join us Thursday night for a special event. We'll have a debate between the top two candidates for Florida governor on the Republican side. We will be live from Orlando at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, hosted by Martha McCallum and yours truly. The president wants to eliminate due process at the border, and we also look at the growing incivility in politics. The panel joins me when we come back.
Saying that this president has done a horrible thing, that this administration that's supporting him and not standing up and speaking the truth are supporting the president in a way that continues his ability to hold on to these children or not find them, what have you. And so when I spoke, I stand by my speech.
If you disagree with someone or something, stand up, make your voice heard. Explain why you think they're wrong and why you're right. Make the argument. Protest peacefully, but no one should call for the harassment of political opponents. That's not right. That's not American.
Which is what many Democrats thought that Maxine Waters did over the weekend, reacting to the story about Sarah Sanders being thrown out of that Red Hen restaurant in Virginia. She said, you need to push back on them. You tell them they're not welcome anywhere anymore. The president tweeting out about Maxine Waters, saying this, quote, the president said, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, an extraordinarily low IQ person, has become, together with Nancy Pelosi, the face of the Democrat Party. She has just called for harm for supporters, of which there are many, of the Make America Great Again movement. Be careful what you wish for, Max. Okay, what about all of this? Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, editor-in-chief for the Weekly Standard, Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, and Charles Hurt, opinion editor for the Washington Times. Charlie.
Well, you know, you've probably gone a little too far if you have Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi sort of pulling her chain back a little bit there on Maxine Waters' remarks. You know, it's tough. You know, I know that this is the kind of thing that really excites a lot of the sort of most rabid supporters on the left, not necessarily even of the Democratic Party, but on the left, the most vociferous haters of Donald Trump. But it's not helping them win any new voters in the middle. And when you have a debate where you have you know, Donald Trump struggling with the vast complexities on the border, trying to figure out some way to fix this problem that nobody likes, as one choice, and then the other choice is Maxine Waters going out saying, yeah, pester these people in public. I think most voters are going to sort of be forced towards the Trump version.
This does happen a lot, it seems, when Democrats are looking at a political upside for a story that maybe is cratering on the Republican side. Then they kind of go over their skis sometimes. And John Tester and Heidi Heitkamp and Joe Donnelly all have to answer questions about Maxine Waters.
Sure. Look, you just heard Chuck Schumer. He does not want the Democratic Party to be the left-wing mirror image of the things they don't like about Donald Trump. They didn't like it when he said, I want to punch a protester in the face, or when he does all sorts of other things they think are uncivil. And that's the challenge. First of all, it's wrong because they didn't like it when Donald Trump did it. Second of all, it's tactically stupid because it's going to backfire, and you already saw the president using it, to say that his supporters are the victims of the left-wing mob. So it's not going to lead to anything good for Democrats, and that's why you saw her called out, and hopefully they'll be able to restrain that because they have to make an argument on the merits.
Steve.
Well, it's been encouraging that some people have challenged what she said, even as many people have defended it or joined along with her. David Axelrod tweeted that he's kind of amazed and appalled by the number of folks on the left who applaud the expulsion of Sarah Huckabee Sanders from this restaurant, and then went on to say exactly what Mara said. He doesn't want to see the left mimic what they criticize in Donald Trump. But look, there's no long-term upside in this kind of incivility. Politics is the art of persuasion, and the people who make long-term gains in politics are the people who do a better job of persuading others that their views are right. Those are the kind of people who take political moments and make them political movements. These are not about arguments. You're not persuading anybody. If Democrats follow Maxine Waters' advice and get in the face of Republicans or harass them at a restaurant, is any Republican going to think, oh yeah, that's the right way to do this? I mean, and the same goes the other way too. I mean, if Donald Trump makes one of those comments, does he actually think he might convert a Democrat who could be interested in or persuaded by an argument on behalf of his policies? It's just not a long-term winner, good as it might feel in the short term.
Right, and on substance is where the battle lies. I said I was going to, as of last week, play as many sound bites as I could of our late friend Charles Krauthammer here talking about the Democratic resistance and what that means politically.
They don't have a message. This is the same reason that Hillary lost. So having nothing to say, they have now fixated on Trump. It's all on the resistance, all about Trump. But think of the big picture. Why do they want to win the House? For one reason. Not tax reform, not jobs. They want to win it so they can start impeaching the president, undoing the election of 2016. That is the biggest mistake, political mistake in political strategy I have ever seen. And I think people understand that's not a worthy cause.
1 year ago this week. All right, so on the immigration issue, the president saying hiring many thousands of judges, going through long and complicated legal process is not the way to go. We'll always be dysfunctional. People must simply be stopped at the border and told they cannot come into the U.S. illegally. Children brought back to their country. If this is done, illegal immigration will be stopped in its tracks at a very little by comparison cost. This is the only real answer, and we must continue to build the wall.
So last week, Donald Trump had everything thrown at him by everybody based on these images down on the border, some of which turned out to be from the previous administration. And the most spectacular, of course, being the photoshopped cover of Time magazine, where it has Donald Trump looking at this girl who's crying. Turns out that child was never separated from her parents. And in fact, further reporting shows that the mother had left her other children back home, which suggests that maybe she's not going to succeed at getting asylum, doesn't deserve asylum based on the criteria. But now, after a week of the hysteria has sort of passed, and we're still down to a really complicated situation on the border, and I think that move by Donald Trump to talk about keeping people from getting into the country so that we don't have to give them due process. It's an argument for building a wall or anything or something that prevents them from getting across the border.
Look, I agree last week was a bad week, but I think the message from the White House is still pretty muddled, and as soon as they clean it up and he gets back to the big, broad issue, we're strong on borders, the Democrats are weak on borders, that's safer ground for him. But when he's talking about due process, The reason why people have an asylum process is to see if they deserve to be let into this country or not. To just decide by fiat that every one of them should be sent back, you know, that's what due process is. Or pick up someone who's an American citizen, just doesn't have their passport on them, send them back, send them over the border to Mexico. I mean, that's why we have a constitution.
This is what this story was undercovered. Fox News Sunday, the former Homeland Security chief, Jay Johnson, talking about not only child separation, but stopping people at the border. Take a listen.
Without a doubt, the images and the reality from 2014, just like 2018, are not pretty. And so we expanded family detention. We had then 34,000 beds for family detention, only 95 of 34,000 equipped to deal with families. So we expanded it. I freely admit it was controversial. We believed it was necessary at the time. I still believe it is necessary to maintain a certain capability for families. We can't have catch and release.
And he defended it, Steve. And I mean, there weren't Obama people being kicked out of restaurants.
No, right. I mean, the thing that was missing from last week's debate, well, there were lots of things missing from last week's debate, but one of the things that was missing was context. I mean, it was what we were seeing wasn't unprecedented. Now, the reason that it was happening, and the reason it was happening in increasing numbers, was unprecedented. I mean, it was a result of a deliberate policy decision that the Trump administration had made because they wanted to serve as a deterrent. The Obama administration had a different approach to it. I think they would argue that what they did, they had to do, and it was regrettable. But it happened. We didn't hear that it happened until several days into the debate. It was a failure on the part of the mainstream media, and I think Charlie's exactly right. I mean, there's all of this navel-gazing among journalists these days about what they can do to restore credibility. Well, the first thing you can do is get the story right. The second thing you can do is when you get it wrong, you don't stand by a misleading image. It's sort of incredible that that picture that Time magazine used tells a story that isn't true in the most fundamental sense, and yet they're standing by the story.
Next up, protests in Iran, big ones, and an election in Turkey, and the president's Middle East plan.
The winner of this election is democracy, our nation. The winners of this election are every one of the 81 million citizens. I want to thank you all who went to the polls today in this democracy festival, which has the highest turnout in our history.
Turkey has cut off its links with democracy. We have entirely transitioned to a one-man regime.
We encourage Turkey to take steps to strengthen its democracy and continue progress toward resolving issues in the bilateral relationship.
Well, Turkish President Erdogan claiming victory in that election. And what does that mean for the Middle East? Meantime, in Iran, we have some video of protests, big ones, about the economy there. And there is a lot of turmoil inside Tehran and other cities inside the country because of the situation with the Iranian economy. Back with the panel. Mara, let's start with Iran. Every time we see this, it is squelched eventually, it seems. Right. Is this different?
I don't know. I don't think we know, but this is what America has wanted for a very long time, that Iran's economic troubles cause its citizens to demand something different than the Ayatollah's regime. Whether, you know, the possibility that sanctions are now going to be renewed in a very tough way, it could be causing this, and we have to just see how it plays out.
All right, turning to Turkey. It seems like he is trying to grab Erdogan more power, and this potentially is, you know, the next Iran in the Middle East.
Yeah, look, contrary to what Erdogan said, the winner of that election was not democracy, and this is not, in fact, a democracy festival, as he said. He's an Islamic extremist who, by virtue of an April 2017 referendum, basically won the ability to make presidential decrees that have the force of law. He is now going to use that power to erode the power of the institutions that constrain him, whether you're talking about the central bank, whether you're talking about opposition parties, whether you're talking about the media. The level of corruption that we've seen in Turkey over the past decade under Erdogan's rule has created unrest underneath this authoritarian power grab. I think there's still a possibility that could cause him problems, but his ability to consolidate power and now remain in power suggests that he's just the latest example of what seems to be the golden age of authoritarianism.
And he's a NATO ally who's friendly with Russia.
Will cause tremendous
that's another
problems in NATO, and also with respect to the Kurds.
It just so happens I picked two topics that the issue of what would Charles say fits.
Subtly, we're making Erdogan our proxy in the region, our agent in the region, but there's one problem. He is not a reliable ally. Erdogan, the president of Turkey, I think, sees himself as the new successor to the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans, the Turks, controlled the Arab world for half a millennium until the First World War. He was elected democratically, but a lot of people were. Putin, Chavez, and others, and then they go ahead and dismantle it. He's done it slightly more slowly than a Putin, but he's dismantled it, and he's attempting to.
And continue to. Charlie, put the two stories together, Turkey and Iran.
Yeah, well, so, you know, remember Erdogan was the hand-picked ally by Barack Obama. He was celebrated as the sort of moderate in the region. And it was all part of, I think, President Obama's desire to sort of withdraw U.S. influence around the world, in particular that part of the world. He did it with Erdogan, and he did it with in Iran. I think that he very much wanted sort of Iran to become the king of that area so that the United States wouldn't have to spend blood and treasure there trying to fix an incredible mess, and it didn't work out in either place. And so I think we'll be picking up the pieces of that foreign policy for a long time.
Panel, thank you. When we come back, a rare moment in soccer action down under.